Thank you for tuning in. This webinar series is presented by C-DEBI, and it focuses on professional development skills needed both in and out of academia. This series is typically held every other month, so stay tuned for another professional development webinar in August. I am Stephanie Schrader, and I oversee the education outreach and diversity component of C-DEBI. Before we start, I will review some webinar reminders and tips. You will be muted during the talk, so if you have a question, please use the chat box. And we will answer questions as they are received, so please ask questions throughout. Today's speaker is Janice McDonnell, a professor in the Youth Development Department and a Science, Engineering, and Technology agent at Rutgers University. She will be talking about how to use the Broader Impacts Wizard, an incredibly useful tool for developing effective BI programs. With that, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm glad that you asked me to do this. The Broader Impact Wizard is one of my favorite projects that we've developed over time. What I'd like to do is give you a kind of a three-part to our presentation today. The first one will kind of pick up where the last webinar that C-DEBI did with Peter Gerges left off in thinking about what exactly we mean by broader impacts and why they're important. Then I'll introduce you to our tool, our Broader Impacts Wizard, and then allow some time for any feedback or comments or questions that you might have. So as we get started, let's kind of reiterate what we know and think a broader impact is. It's obviously a term used by the National Science Foundation, a required element of all of their proposals, along, of course, with intellectual merit. We like to define a broader impact activity as one that is planned, a planned experience that has engagement, action, function, and is conducted over a finite period of time for a specific purpose and with a specific target audience. So that kind of helps us kind of wrap our arms around what it means to be a broader impact. And then when we talk about engagement, we mean that the PI or the project team involved in the funded research is mutually and actively involved with a target audience and participants over a period of time over the PI activity. So this kind of helps us operationally define what we're trying to do in terms of our broader impact. And the important thing with engagement is that it's a two-way street, that you're actually working with an audience and they're working with you and engaged with the work that you're sharing. Going back to NSF's requirements, just as a reminder, NSF has a number of broader impact goals that they encourage PIs to consider when they're writing a grant and, of course, when they're implementing that work on the post-award side. One of the first ones is the full participation of women and persons with disabilities and underrepresented minorities in STEM. They also encourage improved STEM education and educator development at any level. Increased public scientific literacy and public engagement in STEM. Development of a diverse and globally competitive STEM workforce. This is one, incidentally, is typically underutilized in the broader impact on the proposal side. Increased partnerships between academia and industry. And enhanced infrastructure for research and education. All of this is to say that as a federal agency, the current director, Franz Cordova, encourages us to stay relevant with those who entrust us as taxpayers with taxpayer funds. We need to reach out to other stakeholders and consider this research vital to our nation's future. So this is really, really important for Franz as the director of NSF, and obviously to Congress for all of the research to have a relevant component that helps people connect with that research. So the first order of business with a broader impact project and planning one on the pre-award side is to really think about where you as a PI want to make a difference and really think about that as an audience type. I like this graphic that I borrowed from a colleague at the University of Missouri because it kind of breaks those available audience types into kind of three big categories. One as the next generation of folks involved in STEM, and that can be your college and career awareness and readiness kind of continuum, if you will, from pre-K through high school. You have an emerging workforce, which can be composed of our undergraduates and graduates and postdocs and community college and vocational school students. And then our current workforce, which can be adult education, policy, and industry. So this is just kind of a nice way of thinking about those three kind of big categories of potential audiences that your research may be applicable to. And of course, all along the way, thinking about evaluation. We'll come back to that when we get to the wizard. Just take this opportunity to share with you, if you're not familiar with the National Alliance for Broader Impacts, it's a wonderful network. It's actually funded by NSF as an RCN of folks and individuals who are, I call them connectors or BI professionals, who are involved in helping make those connections between different target audiences and the scientists and researchers involved on the research end. And this is, again, a national network trying to promote this cross-institutional collaboration and identify kind of promising practices for the broader impact community who is trying to be these connector points for these two communities. So encourage you to check out their materials. One of the useful things that NABI has created is this guidelines document for reviewers to help with reviewing broader impact statements and really thinking about how does one judge the quality of a broader impact statement. So this document is available online, and it's a wonderful tool if you've been called to be on a panel, to be able to take this document and use it to help review the broader impact portion of a proposal. I also use it on the flip side to develop good broader impact statements and activities, which we'll come back to in a minute. The IRS program is kind of the next follow-on to NABI. It is a continuation of the NABI, expansion and continuation of the NABI network. It's a $5.2 million grant, again, housed out of the University of Missouri, led by Vice Provost there, Dr. Susan Reno. She's working with a network of universities to really think about advancing research impact in society, really taking those principles of broader impacts and really thinking carefully and strategically about how to translate broader impact into an impact on society. So look forward to more from this group, and I encourage you to look at their materials as well. But I want to take you back to a project that we've worked on the last few years called the Broader Impact Wizard. And as Stephanie said, it's a tool designed to help create a good broader impact project for a research proposal. It was developed through an NSF project called COSI, which you may have heard of before, the Centers for Ocean Science Education Excellence. We had a center called COSI Now. The Now stands for Networked Ocean World. And myself and a number of others on our team decided to put our collective experience of working with faculty and developing broader impact projects into a tool that others could use, kind of a collection of our best practices that we developed over the course of our 10 years of working on COSI. And we call it the Wizard because it kind of is a nod back to the days of the annoying little paperclip that used to be on your screen when you used Microsoft Word, I believe it was, that used to try to help you along with your creating Word documents back before all the tips and tricks for doing that were less common. So in a sense, this is a nice tool that can help kind of walk you through the process of developing a broader impact statement. Here's the URL where you can find it, and what I'd like to do now is kind of just walk you through some of the screens to help you explore this tool a little bit, to give you familiarity with it. So here's what our first screen looks like. If you go to cosinow.net/wizard, you will come upon this screen. I definitely encourage you to first start by looking at our 7-minute video. There's an introductory video here that goes over all of the 5 steps that are included in the wizard that can help give you an overview of what each of those phases are of developing a good project. You have kind of 2 choices in using the wizard. One is that you can create an account, and what this allows you to do is save your work and be able to retrieve it later, and also interact with the wizard capabilities of the tool, meaning that you can add text and take notes as you move through the tool, listen to the video tutorials, and interact with the information. You can actually start a draft of your broader impact. And it also gives you an output of literature that may be relevant to the topics that you've selected. And that is only available if you develop an account. If you don't want to develop an account, you can basically use the tool as a guest. And what this does is it doesn't allow you to save your responses. You can only do that again if you have a logged in account that you actually have created for yourself. We do not share this information on the server end. One of the common questions is, where does this information go if I create an account? The information is very separate from the actual use of the tool. So there's no way to, for us to see it. It remains part of your intellectual property. So first screen is kind of the let's begin. Give your project a name and articulate the funding agency that you're working with. In most cases, it's the National Science Foundation, but not always. Sometimes we see NASA projects and other agencies that require an education and outreach component. And as I said, there are approximately 5 steps to the tool. There's some sub-steps within them that help to clarify some of the big overarching steps. But here they are. We take a crack at helping you define an audience, defining a budget, an actual activity, fleshing out a description of your activity, and then, of course, thinking about the evaluation of that activity. So let's just take a moment to kind of go through each of these. I'll give you a general overview of what each of these phases looks like on the tool. And the first one is audience. And again, there's a nice video that accompanies this. And the video is sort of kind of a 2-part thing. There's some advice and tips from ocean scientists who have been involved in our COSI project and have some advice for younger faculty on how to tackle projects, and in this case dealing with audience. And then there's some generalized advice that comes through from the practitioner side. So it's kind of this balance between the two. In this video, we talk a lot about the size of an audience and trying to think through, do you want to reach a lot of people and maybe have less of a content dive into your content? Or do you want to have a smaller audience and maybe do a deeper dive into your content? So the depth of engagement is really important, and being able to recognize that there are differences in those things. And as I mentioned, one of the reviewer questions that comes up with audience, and again, if you look at that NABI document, this is what a reviewer is looking at when they think about this audience type. They're thinking about what is the potential for the proposed activity to benefit society and contribute to the achievement of specific desired societal outcomes. So hopefully this section of the wizard will help you address that reviewer's question and really think about where you want to make a difference. Again, going back to that connector slide that I showed you earlier of, what is the audience where you'd really like to make a difference in your work, and what's most appropriate to share your information with. So this is there's a toggle screen that gives you some basic information about a number of different audience types that you can engage with, everything from K-12 to industry to community groups. They all have a slightly different way of engagement, depth of engagement, recommendations for each of these different audience types. So I encourage you to look at that. The next thing is thinking about budget. This is oftentimes very challenging, especially in smaller research proposals. Over the course of our COSI days, we like to recommend that education and engagement be considered on a baseline at about 10% of the total budget. This is just obviously a marker, somewhat artificial marker. It can be scaled up. It can be scaled down if you have in-kind contributions. But having some commitment, institutional commitment and infrastructure for your broader impact is essential. And again, the reviewer question as a reviewer that you would be asking is, are there adequate resources available to the PI, either at their home institution or through collaborations, to carry out the proposed activity? Is the budget allocated for broader impact sufficient to successfully implement that? So that is a key point. You don't want to propose that you're going to do all kinds of things without having a strong budget in place to show that you've actually thought it through and can actually carry it out given the budget that you've provided. There is a slider scale in the wizard that allows you to kind of select that budget number, and is a great determinant for using the rest of the wizard to help you to fine-tune your audience selection and your activity selection.
Janice, I have a question. If you
Sure.
Is the 10% of the total budget, is that including overhead costs, or is that a different consideration?
I tend to make it 10% of the actual project cost of what you're budgeting for your bottom line. So yeah, it not including the overhead. So that would be just as you're developing your research budget, you're going to create, 10% of that would be, part of your education and outreach. Again, this is not a hard and fast thing. I've gone less, and I've certainly gone more as well. We're advising PIs depending on what it is they want to do.
Got it. Thank you.
Does that help?
Yes.
Yeah, the budget is always a tricky one. I find, too, in the smaller proposals, so research proposals that, let's say, are under 500,000, tend to have smaller budgets for a broader impact, and those that, of course, are larger in scale tend to, review better if they have a more significant budget, which makes intuitive sense. So, and then PIs can get really creative, too, with how they budget. The next part of the wizard is really looking at activity selection, and that really is an effort to connect a effective practice, citing literature, and correlating it to your budget. Those are really the two goals with your activity selection. A lot of PIs that come to my office, and I probably counsel about 20 scientists a year, let's say, right, at least 20 broader impacts over the course of a year. Everybody usually wants to jump to this part of the process before they've really thought about what audience they want to impact, or even how much money they have thought about to dedicate to it. So the activity selection is in many ways the fun part, but it definitely has to be connected to what's already been done, what are the effective practices out there, and I always encourage PIs to situate their project in the cited literature, same as they would their intellectual merit. Really trying to elevate the broader impact portion of proposals the same as you would the intellectual merit, and that it needs to be referenced to what's already been done. One of the things we're working on with IRS is this idea of creating a broader impact identity, which means that you develop a track history, if you will, or over the arc of your career, some expertise in working with a particular audience, and you contribute to that educational literature through your work with broader impacts. And it's kind of an exciting way to think about it, and definitely more engaging for the scientists to think about it more intellectually like that, as opposed to a box-checking initiative of something they have to do. We really discourage them from thinking about it that way, and think about it more as a contribution and a way to make that relevance happen for society. So as a reviewer, we're thinking about, what is the plan for carrying out the proposed activity? Is it well-reasoned, well-organized, and based on sound rationale? So this is where those questions would come into play.
Janice, a question about, so if you're an early career scientist, you think you have a great broader impacts idea, but you don't have any connections with, say, someone like you, and Rutgers obviously incredibly lucky to have you, but how do you connect with someone who will know the educational literature and who knows best practices in implementing different projects?
Yeah, so it's important to find a partner, and one of the things that we're working on with IRS is a connector kind of service, right? One of the best things you can do is, look within your university structure. Most universities have an Office of Community Engagement where you can find, where the university itself may have some connections. Professional societies often have recommendations too for nonprofits or particular societies that may be of interest to the area of work that you're looking to achieve. It is, it can be challenging to find the right partner. Honestly, it is the hardest part of the process, if you will, of developing a broader impact and getting that alignment to happen where you have mutual respect and collaboration. But there are tools out there, between your community engagement offices at your universities and professional societies to help you make some of those connections. And of course, I would send people back to the NABI network. That's a network of 700 strong of people like myself who are interested in this kind of brokering work. Who can easily be reached out to help with that kind of task. So speaking of partners, you definitely need a comprehensive team to execute your plan. And as Stephanie, as you just said, I think this is the critical link. And one of the things you want to do is not try to do everything yourself. To find the right folks to help with website design or whatever it is that you want to do, finding the right partner to do that is a critical step and does take some time. And that's one of the key points, is not to leave your broader impact for the last minute either for that reason, because sometimes it does take a little bit of effort to ferret out and find the right partner and the right contractors to make all the pieces come together. But there is support out there. You can always, contact the NABI network is always great about regionally finding that kind of support. So the reviewer question here is, how well qualified is the individual, team, or institution to conduct the proposed activities? You're looking for that credibility factor too. This is one of the favorite parts of the wizard that we get feedback from scientists on, the SMART Objectives Builder. We have, many folks have not heard of this acronym, but SMART is a great way to think about how you develop your goals and objectives. It's an acronym for specific, measurable, audience-based, relevant, and time-bound. And it really helps you think about putting some boundary conditions on your project so that you're able to articulate and achieve what you've proposed. So this little portion of the wizard is very popular. Lots of folks use it to help them develop the goals for their project, goals and objectives for their project. And again, as a reviewer, you're looking to answer the question, to what extent do the proposed activities suggest and explore creative, original, or potentially transformative concepts? And again, this word transformative is one that NSF uses a lot. They're looking for, kind of the next level work when it comes to progressing the field or contributing to the field, not only in an intellectual merit capacity, but also through broader impacts. So, so these SMART objectives are really important in that space. And this evaluation is the final phase of the wizard, and it helps you think about creating measurable outcomes and methods for how you're going to do that and how you're going to articulate those outcomes. So there's a wonderful video here if you're not familiar with evaluation and you need an evaluation 101, so to speak. This little video was done by Ari Daniel, who works for NOVA, and he does a great job of kind of walking you through the 3 levels of evaluation, including the front end, the formative, and the summative evaluation work. So this is a very important piece. As a reviewer, you're looking for how does the plan incorporate a mechanism to access success. And I will add here that, you know, through the COSI days, we talked about the value of an internal versus external evaluator and when those different types of evaluation skills are needed. This is another time when you really could use the expertise of someone who has experience in the social sciences, who does evaluation work to help set the stage for that. There is a network of national evaluators who are searchable by region. I've turned lots of PIs to them. We also have a short list here at Rutgers of good evaluators who've worked in the ocean sciences and specifically to help connect those dots for PIs. So, so that's another really important component of the work.
Oh, Janice. Oh,
yes.
One question about budgeting for evaluation, because if you're just starting out, you don't realize that you do need to pay your internal or external evaluators. How much of the budget do you kind of allocate for evaluations?
Yeah, so in my case, I typically recommend to PIs that it be 10% of your total education and engagement budget. So, you know, roughly, again. And if it's external, sometimes it's a little bit more expensive. I also encourage them to look at other NSF-funded initiatives like CASE, for example, the Center for Advancement of Informal Science Education. They have a wonderful set of evaluation instruments that are vetted and that would allow you to compare work and data sets if you use those tools. So there's some shortcuts, I guess, is what I'm saying, to reduce your evaluation budget if you do the legwork and work with an organization like CASE to use some of their existing tools. Because a lot of the cost with evaluation is tools development and data analysis. So a lot of times you can get, what I've done with a lot of PIs is kind of cut some corners fiscally by using some of those CASE tools and then, you know, paying a small fee for an evaluator consultant to kind of guide the process, and then maybe using a graduate student on the PI's research team to actually analyze, you know, pull the data together, analyze it, and then send it back to the evaluator for final comment. There's some ways to kind of cut the cost, if you will, of an evaluation expert. But it is important. Okay, so this is what the output looks like for the wizard. If you log in and develop an account, you would take notes as you go about audience and your selections and the decisions you've made through the wizard, your first crack at your objectives and your partners and your activities. But one of the favorite things, like I said, is when you choose an audience, the wizard will self-select some relevant literature for you to help get you started, so to speak, with some of the key literature pieces. One of the things I haven't mentioned so far is we are updating the wizard. The current version on the COSI site is a number of years old now, but luckily through IRS we have funding to update it and modernize it in a 2.0 version. So we will definitely be doing that, and with that will come an expanded relevant literature section that will be tied to these different audience types again. So that's something we can definitely look forward to in terms of you know, updating what's already here. But that is one of the favorite features of PIs who use the tool, and you know, certainly gives you a sense of where to start, you know, in terms of connecting your work to others. This is just to say that there are some other materials on the COSI Now website. There's some pre-award and post-award materials. Perhaps one of the more useful things are the case studies that are listed there. We did take some time through our 10 years of COSI now to document, again, with Ari Daniel, with some audio clips and some really nice templated case studies, some of the successes and challenges that our PIs have had with developing broader impacts. And those are there as kind of food for thought or inspiration to help you think through, what some of those, what your work could look like, and help building your own broader impact identity from their lessons learned, so to speak. So I definitely encourage you to look at those. There are others. Georgia Tech has a beautiful website of case studies on broader impacts that can be very useful. So there's lots of different places we can go. And as we build up our IRS resources, there'll be more and more available that I can certainly make available to this audience as well for, for that inspiration, so to speak. So those are there. And then I just wanted to take a moment to mention this. There are, in terms of next steps, there are some opportunities to work with the IRS community, where I'm in charge of developing a set of new training modules for broader impact professionals to help guide the field in terms of preparing researchers in particular for developing broader impact work. So this one in light blue across the top is an existing module we call Broader Impacts 101 that kind of walks you through an expanded version of the wizard, if you will. And then we're in production right now of modules 1, 2, 3, and 4 that you see listed here, which will be an expanded look at audience, in this case for module 1. This idea of broader impact identity for module 2. We'll be partnering with another NSF-funded project called STEM Ambassadors. And then this module 3, which is constructing a broader impact project, some of the nuts and bolts of that. And then module 4, which is a deeper dive into evaluation and working with an evaluator. Thinking about things like return on your investment and collective impact and those kinds of things that are important for some of the larger scale NSF projects. So this is a work in progress. We're just a few months now into the IRS grant, but as that develops, I definitely will share that with Stephanie and his audience, obviously, to help with those resources. So in general, that's what the Wizard's all about, and I definitely look forward to its update and sharing that with all of you as well. But it's still a functional and I think useful tool for thinking about broader impacts. I hope that was helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you, Janice. I have one question, and basically if someone is starting out and they're even before they use the Broader Impacts Wizard, how does one go about starting to think about how they want to translate their science into more of a societal impact, and how does one even start that process?
Yeah, so kind of deconstructing your science and thinking about your science communication skills is something we've worked on for a number of years, especially with early career scientists. And there's a number of different ways to attack it, depending again on the type of audience that you're most interested in working with. But it's this idea of thinking about, how can you break down or deconstruct or pull out the big ideas of your research to connect to the so what. How does society think about or care about what it is you're doing? And I guess one piece of advice that we always do is kind of create an opportunity for members of that audience to interact with PIs to help with that grounding. So we run a lot of different workshops here at Rutgers, and I know a lot of other organizations do this as well, to help with that connection. So the more time you spend with an audience and the more that you understand them, the easier it becomes to sort of think about what about your research would be interesting and compelling to them. So it's really about putting the time in and doing that collaborative two-way street that I mentioned. You don't have to figure it all out on your own. It's really about that conversation and thinking about reaching out for that help and that partnership with the audience you're trying to engage. And then from there, it's working on your science communication skills and becoming a better communicator of what it is that you're trying to share. And again, that audience can again be really helpful with that. But I think really thinking about it that way, that it's really not all on your shoulders to figure it out, but making that connection to an audience and asking for their help and partnership is probably the most important part. And then picking an audience that you identify with. So we try to encourage that as much as possible. To find niche-based audiences that you find as a PI or as a scientist or researcher really compelling, that you want to work with. And dispel the myth that everybody has to work with K-12 students or teachers. That's not the only audience out there that is available to work with. There's such a wide range of niches that you can kind of fit in. We tell the story of a professor who was working in songbirds, and he happened to be a cat lover, and really developed this amazing project looking at sharing his songbird predation problems with house cats, and shared that in pet stores, and wrote an article for Cat Fancy magazine, and did all this really interesting stuff with, all through the love of cats, because he happened to be a cat owner. So really looking at your own personal interests and then trying to find an audience that matches that oftentimes makes the broader impact more fulfilling and more interesting and easier to do, because you've connected the dots and deconstructed it in a way that makes sense to you. Does that help?
Yes, that does.
Good.
Great. And are there any other questions?
I see Gwen thing. Hi, Gwen.
All right. If not, thank you again, Janice. This was incredibly helpful, and I'm glad we now have this as a resource. And
Great.
we will be posting this video in a few days, so stay tuned. And thank you again.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Yes. All right. Have a great day.
You too.